You think this is bad? Look forward to when they start doing 1, 2, 3 combos with it. On the one hand, I wasn't needing healing. On the other hand, this took a while. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we have 10 duties where I alternate between DPS, healer and tank for some variety. Tank and healer seem to be a lot more likely to get leveling content, and especially lower level stuff, where DPS were more likely to get max level stuff. But there is of course not nearly enough data in just a set of 10 duties to say anything conclusive. With that said, as a result, we did get some more variety this time around. For duty 1, we got Lost City of Amdapor hard as Dancer. Compared to previous runs here, the first boss actually went really well, despite the tank and healer not seeming to care much about the way they were facing for the hallucination mechanic. Also, remember that the gremlins can apply a debuff that is only removable by using the /comfort emote while within a certain distance of the player. The debuff increases damage taken, so it can be helpful if the debuff is on the tank. On the last boss, I also noticed it did seem like the tank was not very keen on moving anywhere unless the boss outright forced them. Regen bubble for the boss? No worries. Evil dark AoE circle that hurts you? No problem. Proximity AoE? Time to sprint! The healer also seemed to not be aware of stacking up for the Cure 4. Despite that, of course, the run went just fine. For duty 2, we went as Sage to the Dragon's Neck, one of the Hildebrand trials. This trial in particular can both be a complete pushover, total chaos, and even feel outright impossible, depending on a combination of how much the team respects the boss mechanics, or alternatively, how much damage they can do. To go over the reason why this can be, we need to talk about how the fight actually works. Typhon has a select few moves that knocks you back, and for the most part, they just yeet you off the arena completely. Fortunately, getting knocked off the arena doesn't kill you, just puts you down for the count for a bit, and you can simply jump back on the arena once it is done. But if there are no players in the arena, the fight is immediately lost. Ultras, on the other hand, mainly does damage, and that is hardly a problem at this point. Now, Typhon's regular Avungas can simply be dodged, and while Snort Salt can easily shove the entire party off in short order, you can just follow it around as Typhon spins. But Severe Snort is unavoidable, aside from knockback immunities, which, for the record, was a lot more scarce back in actual A Realm Reborn. However, you may have noticed that all the DPS players get turned into imps throughout the fight. The imps getting hit by Ultros' Aqua Breath gain a stack of a buff called Wet Plate, which you can stack up to 2. When Typhon starts charging the Severe Snort, it gets 8 stacks of a buff. Imps using Imp Punch on Typhon during this time will spend Wet Plate stacks to reduce Typhon's buff stacks, and if it reaches 0 stacks, Severe Snort is cancelled. Notably, as Typhon and Ultras can be defeated before Severe Snort is used twice, and you can use knockback immunity for the first one, this entire mechanic may be something you can completely ignore. And that is the reason why simply doing enough damage can make this fight seem trivial, despite this weird mechanic. Case in point, this run was beaten through the power of simply doing enough damage. For duty 3, we went to Vanaspati as Warrior, and it seems the machinist knew me. Hello! Overall, this run went super well. At times, I was curious if the Sage was using their tools optimally, but honestly, they didn't need to stop and cast healing spells during fights, so it doesn't really matter. Everything went well. On the second boss, we had quite a close call with the Reaper missing the window with the bubbles here, so fortunately both me and the healer were on point to catch them as soon as possible. And on the last boss, I just wanted to highlight how there are only 2 patterns on the meteor drop mechanic here. Either the safe column will be middle left, middle right, far left, or it will be middle right, middle left, far right. And the appropriate corner of the arena will not be hit by a circle AoE when the final set lands, which is the reason why the machinist and I can run so confidently forward for each set without really looking once the first set of meteors appear. By the way, Did you know that Warrior can solo Vanaspati synced? For duty 4, we have Under the Armor as Red Mage. Woo! Obviously, nothing happens of interest. Nothing. I guess the most interesting thing that happens is that I have Core for weaving? Or maybe that I used a non-enchanted riposte at the end because the boss would die before I could cast Jolt? Nothing interesting happened is what I'm getting at. For duty 5, we have a very spoilery one if you have yet to complete the leveling story of Endwalker. If you don't want to see it, jump to this timestamp shown on screen. With that said, we went to the final days with what appears to be 4 first-timers. A good time to be a red mage to say the least. We didn't have so many deaths that red mage was outright necessary, but there was one point where casting 2 Veraces in quick succession ended up being helpful. An interesting detail about the fight is that you will be able to use a Limit Break 3 on the intermission mob, as you are granted a full gauge as a reward for defeating it. However, not a lot of players know that, so if you start casting Limit Break here, it is likely to lead to panic, not to mention the possibility that a healer will simply use Rescue to stop you, so there is just no need for that. We obviously don't need the Limit Break 3 for the damage here. After that, I think it isn't uncommon that players forget that after the first Meteor Strike, you can attack the Endsinger while she prepares the second one. I used this opportunity to build for many melee combos, not that it was necessarily optimal, but it did mean I got to use 3 melee combos in succession in the second part of the fight, which is always entertaining. For duty 6, we went to the Navel as Sage, just the normal version. I always forget how long these opening cutscenes are. What really stood out to me in the fight though, was that it felt like the summoner spent quite a while after using Ether Charge just standing there doing nothing, or just heavily overshooting how much they needed to move when mechanics targeted them. No big deal, it hardly affected the overall clear time, it was just a bit strange. A very easy run as probably expected. That said, here's a little detail to consider that is not exactly relevant for the normal version, but is worth noting for the hard version of this fight. Whoever Titan jails in the hard version will receive a damage down debuff, that is probably worth using Ishuna on as a healer. For duty 7, we went to the Sunken Temple of Qarn hard as Gunbreaker, and well, the healer was something else. They seem to use Lucid Dreaming and Presence of Mind on cooldown regardless of logical reasoning. I base this on the fact they used them while people were still in cutscenes. They also seem to be the kind of white mage that thinks Cure 3 is just generally stronger than Cure 2, so it was used liberally on just me when more healing was needed. There were even points where the concerning Cure 1, Cure 2, Cure 3 rotation was used. Like, in terms of just healing, I have very little idea what they had in mind, because sometimes they would use Cure 1 repeatedly when more healing was needed, and other times they would spam Cure 3 for just me. They also never used Holy, not once. And while they would on rare occasions use Stone on single target fights, they did also spend quite a lot of time not doing much, just in general. I want to underline that very early on I offered to give them advice, but they didn't respond, so I didn't try to push any further. I also noted that we had a language barrier problem. I offered the advice after we had a pull with less healing needed, and they still didn't attack. Because the healer was a traveler and someone else shared language settings with them, I am assuming they queued together with the machinist, but that is just a guess. Anyway, despite all this, the run went just fine. Although a lot slower than it needed to, of course. On the final boss, the healer was also the one that ended up getting chased and subsequently mummified. For duty 8, we have another Endwalker spoilery duty, so if you haven't completed the Endwalker leveling story, you may want to hop to the timestamp shown here. Otherwise, I was a 14-minute replacement in Dead Ends as a samurai. 14-minute replacement. And they were on the second boss. I'm very curious how that happened. Especially because once we got the run underway, it didn't seem like there were any major issues with anyone in the group, and we did just fine. I noticed the dancer was not using their bigger cooldowns much during the trash packs, but that is really a minor detail. Surely that wasn't the reason it took this long. Perhaps they waited this long for replacement without trying to progress. Well, actually I noticed that the dancer had their dance partner as the Sage when I arrived initially. when honestly they probably should have put it on the tank. Again, did that have anything to do with the 14-minute replacement thing? Probably not. Anyway, the point is, the run went fine. For duty 9, we went to Pharos Sirius as Sage, and I get the impression our tank here has done this duty a lot, or was just very confident. I don't recommend pulling like this with just any tank healer team. Here at the start, I reapply shields as the tank is pulling, specifically because I know that pulling all of this can easily kill the tank too fast for me to do much. However, our tank also knew to use Hallowed Ground exactly for this, so it went just fine. A common thing I see with the first boss is that tanks know to pull him to the edge, but specifically the side edges being the better spots is not something I see many tanks consider. We also had a team that did help a bit with the dogs, making things a bit safer. Then, we have another one of the scarier pulls. The thing that makes these pulls particularly scary is the corrupted sprites casting Banish 3, which hurts a lot if you're nearby. But because everyone just ran for it, this was not a problem while pulling. And once we reached our destination, the tank actually had this maneuver ready to deal with both banishes. In retrospect, they could have used Interject for one of them. But low blow into shield bash absolutely worked as well. For just a moment, I actually expected the tank to pull these adds into the second boss room, but they didn't. What tends to make this boss fight so chaotic is that if you just attack the boss, the adds will start to pile up, which can be problematic. But if you kill the adds, the boss gets really angry, making it do more damage. Overall, the boss doing more damage is no big deal, as most of its attacks are survivable. But the body slam is an 8-second stun, removable with Ishuna for some reason, that is accompanied by a lot of damage. My best advice here is to make sure you don't stand close to anyone, so the boss only ever gets to body slam one person at a time. Otherwise, sometimes the boss will just slam double kill. By the way, I'm perfectly aware it is more optimal to have the machinist run back than raising them like this, but telling them to do that and then waiting for them to do that is going to waste more time, so there's just no need. We continue. When dealing with these valves, make sure no one is standing in front of them. Otherwise, when a cloud comes out, it will hurt anyone trying to turn off the valve. Turn it off from behind at an angle like this, and as long as no one else walks in front, it'll be fine. Then, after that, we have Tyrant, which, if I didn't know better, was a boss they originally planned for Guildhest, because it dies just as fast. And then, finally for the last boss, the only real big thing to keep in mind is that this debuff is sort of like a Doom removed by healing fully. Aside from that, not much to really worry about as long as you don't completely ignore the adds. Overall, a very nice and speedy run. And finally for duty 10, we land in Aurum Vale as Dark Knight. The DPS players seem to be doing well, but there is something with the healer. To start, we do the classic of leaning to the left, pulling just the minimum, and line of sighting the ranged mobs into the boss room. However, the healer seems to only use Adloquium and Succor. Nothing else. So once we have some room to breathe, I remind them of Aetherflow and Lustrate, although in retrospect, I should have reminded them of Art of War. As you know, it is a gain on 1. And Scholar can solo this dungeon synced. Throughout the entire dungeon, I only saw the healer use Adloquium and Succor, and I suppose rarely they would use Aetherflow, and then, I guess Lustrate, the buff would disappear. The way they moved I also felt seemed a bit robotic at times. I will say, they did do some things sort of randomly, and sometimes jumped and things like that, and it did seem like their strategy changed a bit throughout the duty. But I was very suspicious that they might have been a bot. A very awkward run. As I've mentioned before, remember to heal the amount needed and then at least consider attacking. If you aren't well acquainted with the duty, or are a bit afraid, it is perfectly okay to be a little extra careful. But if you're just standing there waiting for something to do, cast something. If you find out you needed to cast a heal, you can always cancel and heal instead. But if you never attack, you will never know when it is safe to attack. With that said, an overall decent session this time, although there were some weird healers especially this time around. Anyway, we managed to reach 190 Mentor Roulettes this time, so just one more set to the 200. Then we will be a 10th of the way. I do think mixing up the jobs for a session helps a lot with keeping things fresh and not making any particular common mistake get too aggravating by seeing it from different perspectives throughout a session. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, the fruits in the first and final boss room seem to remove any debuffs that happen to be on you, perhaps aside from vulnerability stacks or something? Why this matters is that the final boss uses Bad Breath, which applies a lot of debuffs that can all be removed with one fruit.